All right. Thank you for joining today. I'm Justin Nassiri. This is the CEO Visibility Gap, a hidden drag on portfolio company growth. I want to start off with a question, and that is, what is the most expensive impression on the internet? It is not a Super Bowl ad. It is not a homepage banner on the Wall Street Journal. The most expensive impression on the internet is the one your biggest customer sees before they decide whether or not to take your phone call. One of the case studies that we'll be covering today is a CRO that I work with at a consumer products company. He built North America's market from 0 to 200 million in under 5 years. And two of the three biggest retailers in the United States, we're talking the biggest ones, they regularly reference his LinkedIn posts in their B2B sales conversations, not as press releases, not as companies' marketing materials, his LinkedIn posts. That's what this webinar is about today. It's not going to be theory. It's not 10 LinkedIn hacks. We're going to be talking about 4 real case studies from private equity-backed companies where their CEO visibility directly drove an exit, recruiting, an IPO, and revenue. The data that we'll be sharing today is specific, the pattern is repeatable, and the conclusion is hard to argue with. I'm going to take about 5 minutes to define what this visibility gap is and why it's so important. And then we will spend the bulk of our time going through those 4 different case studies. I will recap at the end what that exact playbook is to follow, and then I'll make sure that we keep some time at the end for Q&A. As you have questions, I'll try to do a good job of monitoring the Q&A portal, so feel free to place questions there as we go if something I'm saying doesn't land or if you have questions on it. Or you can keep that for the end. Quick background, my name is Justin Nassiri. I started my career in the United States Navy on board nuclear submarines. After that, went to Stanford, got my MBA. I have run 3 different companies with 2 exits. And in this capacity, I've worked with about 350 executives at this point. 200 of them are senior leaders, either Series B or later. So a lot of the C-suite that I work with is where I'm drawing the case studies from today. So what is this visibility gap that we're going to be talking about? What I have observed in working with our private equity-backed clients is that most portfolios have a playbook for pricing, they have a playbook for go-to-market, for talent, for operations, but they do not have a playbook for CEO and leadership visibility. And that is a problem. When a candidate researches your leadership team considering about applying to a job, and if they find nothing, that's not 0, that is a negative. And when a potential acquirer looks up your CEO and looks up your leadership team and they see tumbleweeds, that creates doubt. When your CRO has no digital presence and a competitor's CRO is everywhere, your sales team is starting every conversation at a disadvantage. And so when this invisibility occurs, it's a major cost. We find in the work that we do and just in the world in general, unfortunately, the best company is not the one that wins, but perception matters. The best perceived company is the one that gets the customers, that gets the key hires, that gets the best investors and acquirers, and gets the internal stakeholders aligned and bought in with where they're going. And so why this matters right now, first and foremost, this is no longer just about CEO. I'll talk about CEO a lot today because they're usually a good stand-in for the primary brand ambassador. But the truth is, this is a similar motion and playbook for CROs, CMOs, COOs. They are being evaluated before the first conversation happens. And most companies have 0 strategy for any of them. A second reason why this is important today, the competitors are getting louder. I do about 500 calls a year with C-suite members. Probably 40% of them start off by saying, look, we are the best in the industry. We have the best team, the best track record, the best case studies, but we are losing out to this other company that has a fraction of our talent, fraction of our experience. Like we are losing out because they are perceived or more aware in the market. So there's a real cost to that. And then lastly, why I think this is so important today, your external and internal stakeholders are already on LinkedIn. The buyers of your product and service are there. Your candidates for key roles are there. Board members are there. Acquirers are there. Journalists are there. All of them are in one spot, and that continues to be LinkedIn, which is why we'll talk about that specifically. So where does this show up in portfolios? And we're going to I'll tie this today to four distinct case studies. But I see this in exits, de-risking the transition, being a known expert, a known commodity, a known voice, de-risks the acquirer taking on that team. When it comes to talent, the top candidates are doing their research before they even apply to the job, before they even accept the role. And we'll talk about how this shows up in talent. Pipeline. Everyone knows the buyer's journey has changed. Prospects are forming opinions about your company before they even talk to you, before you even reach out to them. And then in the market position, the less experienced competitor whose leader owns the narrative more often than not wins. And that's the ways that I see it show up most often in the private equity backed companies that we work with. And so, as we do this work right now across over 350 executives, before I share the case studies, I want to share with you what the data shows across these executives, because there is a pattern in what doesn't work that matters as much as what does work. Mistake number one that we see is resharing on LinkedIn. And I just want to be really explicit at the start. Resharing is not visibility. Reposting a company's press release is not building a voice. Original perspective is the only currency that compounds. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in each of these case studies. The mistake number two that we see in prospects that we talk with is that so humbled to be featured is not a strategy. Company promotion alone, the press releases, the product launches, the we're hiring posts, that is always the lowest performing content category every single time across every executive we've studied and that we've worked with. And so if that is the strategy, there is no strategy. What actually works is shaping the industry out loud. Leaders creating categories cannot do that behind the scenes. They have to educate the market. They have to define the narrative, and that has to happen in public. Okay, let's move on to the case studies. So we are going to be dealing today with four private equity backed companies, four private equity backed leaders. All of these are clients that I have worked with directly for at least 2 years. We will talk about one of them, a healthcare software company that had a $2 billion exit. We'll talk about a second company, a chief clinical officer at a healthcare services company that had a 26% increase in headcount amidst the biggest hiring shortage in this industry's history. The third case study I'm calling the platform builder. We're going to talk about a $6 billion IPO for this enterprise software company. And then the final one is a chief revenue officer. I'll call him the closer. Went from zero to $200 million in sales for his consumer products company. We'll dive into the first one. So, oops, excuse me. First case study. This is the most common scenario that I see in private equity backed leaders. You've got a brilliant operator. They have deep expertise in their industry. And yet, despite that, they have zero digital footprint. The question here is not whether the CEO is good. The question is, does anyone outside of the organization know that? And so when this person came to us, There was a pretty big before and after. Specifically, on LinkedIn, they had posted 5 times in the previous eight months. This is a Harvard MBA track record of being backed by PE companies and having successful exits. His average post did well, 72 likes on average, but really no consistent presence and no real recognizable narrative. After, and this is 2 years later, this person is now posting 240 times a year, so an insane volume. The posts are routinely getting over 400 likes, so massive visibility as well as validation. And this person went from essentially zero to extremely visible and credible publicly and digitally in about 18 months was that transformation. The biggest thing here is the exit. Fortune 500 company bought them for $2 billion. Now, did LinkedIn cause that acquisition? Of course not. The product was strong, the team was strong, the private equity sponsor did their job. But here's what I want you to think about with this case study. When the acquisition was announced by their CEO, it reached everyone in their industry because after 2 years of consistent publishing, he had built that audience first. The announcement didn't attract the audience. The audience was there waiting for the announcement. And that's the key insight from this case study. Visibility is not built at the moment of exit. It's built 24 months before anyone knows an exit is coming. Unfortunately, you cannot turn on visibility when you need it. That runway has to be laid first. And so I think this is a pretty representative case study for me. Oftentimes, we have people approaching us prior to a major fundraise, major product launch, key hire, exit, and they're wanting to make the most of that announcement then. It's too late. You have to be thinking further ahead on this. And that's what I love so much about this first example. We'll move on to the second example. I'm calling this one the recruiter. Before, so excuse me. In this one, the challenge was not revenue. This company was operating with a very high revenue and great margins, but the challenge was talent. To be specific, this company operates with what's called ABA therapy, and over the last several years, there's been a nationwide shortage of qualified candidates for these roles. So they found that their traditional recruiting channels were failing and more job posts was not the answer. So they tried something different. They made one of their key leaders visible. But the data that really changed my thinking was the content breakdown. So we'll get into that in a second. So this was the transformation we saw, and this was over the course of about 3 years. The posting frequency obviously went up. That's one of the key components is that the leaders have to show up consistently with original thoughts. And we'll get into that much more precisely in a second here. The engagement went up corresponding with that visibility. But most importantly, this single chief clinical officer was cited as the number one source of new hires. It led to a 26% headcount growth during an industry-wide talent shortage. So when we look at the content mix that drove that, the most liked posts were not, "We are hiring, we are a great company, I'm so humbled to be featured in Forbes." They were personal leadership stories. The most strategically valuable posts were team spotlights, recruiting ads that don't look like recruiting ads. And this leader did an extremely adept job of being very vulnerable, showing how he led, showing how his team was doing, showing what he was learning from his team, really illustrating in 3 dimensions what it is like to be part of not just a company, but a mission. And for this person, The company promotion was about 37% of all of their content. But as you can see, that is their lowest performing category. The personal and leadership content drove twice the engagement. And I'll say that again. The company promotion, the thing that most CEOs and C-suite members default to, performed worst. The personal leadership stories performed best. LinkedIn became this company's best recruiting billboard, and the executive didn't have to ask anyone to apply. So that's the key takeaway from this second one. When you supercharge your leaders, they become your primary recruiter. And I shared that before and after, but just sharing that again here. Third case study. I'll call this one the platform builder. This one is pretty different. Honestly, of most of the people I've worked with, this one's very different. And that's because the founder and CEO of this enterprise software company, they have about 5,000 employees. He eventually, while we were working together, took the company public at a $6 billion valuation. But here's why this one's so interesting. When this CEO came to us, he was already extremely active on LinkedIn. This person, they were posting 18 times a month, which is more than most executives on LinkedIn. So the challenge here was not getting him to post. The challenge instead was getting him to be human. So when we looked at his content, 52% was industry commentary. That's safe, that's professional, and that's very forgettable. He was a commentator, but he was not a leader when it came to his online presence. He was telling people what was happening in his industry, but he wasn't telling them who he was. So that was the shift that was strategic. We moved from pure industry commentary to a balanced content mix across four pillars, and the results were dramatic. He actually posted slightly less. He went from 18 posts a month to 14 original posts, but the impressions went up 71%. His engagement rate went up 52%. He was doing less and getting dramatically more. And here is the killer insight. Personal content, stories about his personal journey, his life, his values, his work adjacent topics, that drove 2.5 times the reach of his industry content. 2.5 times. Think about that. The safe, professional industry commentary that most CEOs default to, that establishes credibility, but it doesn't build reach. It doesn't build an audience. The personal stories are what multiply everything. Personal leadership stories, personal origin stories. And then this leader took their company public, 6 billion IPO, but he'd been building his public reputation for years before the roadshow. When institutional investors evaluated the company, they already knew who he was. That's the compounding effect of visibility. And oftentimes when I talk to our later stage client leadership, it's almost like, hey, this is an inevitability. If you're going public, you better get used to speaking publicly. You better get used to being judged publicly. You can build those reps on a platform like LinkedIn. You can build that muscle so that when you're truly in the spotlight, you're ready. One last case study. I'll call this one the closer. And I saved it for last because it's the most visceral proof point. This is a chief revenue officer at a consumer products company, private equity backed. This person has built out their North American market from 0 to 200 million in under 5 years. Now, before working with us, this person had posted 5 times a year for a decade. It was very sporadic. It was very unfocused. There was no strategy. This is a leader with massive commercial impact and almost no digital footprint. Afterwards, he's now posting 7 posts a month, 18 times the posting frequency. His average likes went from 36 to 174, and he's getting 5 times the engagement growth. Now, the posts by the number, what I want to be really clear here, the likes don't matter. I know I'm kind of referencing that. What does matter is what happens in the sales conversations. So, 2 of the 3 biggest retail partners in the world regularly reference this person's LinkedIn posts in these B2B sales conversations. Let me unpack why that matters. The most expensive impression on the internet is not the one that goes viral. It's the one a buyer at a top 3 retailer sees before a meeting and use it to decide whether they trust the person as a long-term partner or not. That's not a vanity metric. That is enterprise value. That relationship is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And when I looked at his top performing posts, it's the same pattern as the other case studies. The highest performing content isn't product promotion, it's milestone storytelling that made buyers and partners feel like they were part of the journey. Flagship retail launches, industry awards, thanking partners by name. This, apologies, this is not showing as cleanly as I'd like. But the engagement, what I want to show here is that this engagement is compounding year over year. Even as posting volume has stabilized in 2025, 2026, engagement has continued to climb. Each post lands harder as this credibility accumulates. That's the flywheel that we're trying to build here. So the pattern here is we've got 4 different industries. We've got healthcare software, healthcare services, enterprise software, consumer products. I've got 4 different roles. I've got a CEO, a founder and CEO, a chief clinical officer, a chief revenue officer. 4 different outcomes: $2 billion exit, 26% headcount growth, $6 billion IPO, top 2 of 3 retailers referencing LinkedIn posts in sales meeting. It's the same pattern though every time. Start publishing consistently, shift the content mix towards personal and leadership stories, compound over 2 to 4 years. That's it. That's the framework. But I do want to break down the content framework because the data has made this impossible for our team and our clients to ignore. So this is the framework that we generally approach with as a starting point. First one, industry thought leadership. This is your credibility base. It establishes expertise and positions you as a category authority. It's necessary, but across every executive we've studied, it was never the highest performing content category. It's table stakes, but not the differentiator. Pillar 2, leadership and career journey. This is the trust builder. Vulnerability, growth stories, lessons from failures. These outperform polished content every single time. This is where people start to feel like they get to know you. Pillar 3, company promotion. This is team spotlights, wins, milestones. I call these recruiting ads that don't look like recruiting ads. They're important for volume, but they're always going to be the lowest performing category when you look at engagement. And they're unfortunately what most C-suite members default to is the only thing they do. Pillar 4, I would call work adjacent or personal. This is your personal values, your family, causes you care about. Personal content drives 2.5 times the reach of industry content. It's a multiplier that makes everything else work. And quick aside here, this particular category is different for everyone. Usually when I'm engaging with these leaders, the question that I ask to help gauge what is inbounds and out of bounds here is if you were at a dinner party with all of your ideal audience members at the table, customers, investors, key hires, over drinks, what are you comfortable talking about? Is there a hobby? Is there family? Is there like, what can you talk about in that environment that's not work? that's a pretty good proxy for what is appropriate on LinkedIn. And I have clients who will talk about their kids. I have clients who will never talk about their kids. I have clients that will talk about a sport or a hobby and people who won't do that. There's no right or wrong here. It is about authenticity. So now the key insight that you need, all four of these pillars have to work together. Personal content is the reach multiplier. Industry content is the credibility base. Leadership stories build trust. Company promotion provides the volume. This mix matters enormously. And what most CEOs get wrong is they over index on the company promotion and then to a lesser extent, the industry commentary. Those are the two lowest performing categories. They completely skip the personal and leadership stories that actually build that audience. One last aside before I move on. The great thing, and this is why I love LinkedIn, you can get quantitative here. You can get the data. When we are proposing these strategies, you only need that strategy for about 90 days until you start to get the signal. You will get very detailed notes through LinkedIn, what posts and what content and what topics are resonating with the people you care about and which ones are falling flat. So this does become a heat-seeking missile over time where you know the greatest hits that resonate with your specific target audience. And what I love about that is I don't think this is just about LinkedIn. This becomes the signal to empower your broader marketing and communication strategy. I would hope that a CEO or a CMO or a COO running this playbook, when they are on a podcast, they know their greatest hits. When they are being interviewed, when they're on TV, there's no guesswork. They have actual data about the stories, the anecdotes, the compelling topics that resonate with audiences. I do not know of a single channel that gives you that precise data in this clean of a way. So the last thing that I want to address is the compound effect. And I think this is the most personal one because it gets into the mindset that we deal with so often with leaders. Every CEO who quits too early. All four case studies show the same hockey stick. Months 1 through 3 feel like nothing is happening. Likes are low, reach is limited. You're publishing into the void and wondering why you're doing this. And if you have not posted on LinkedIn, it's hard to express how uncomfortable that is when you have a titan of an industry, someone who has raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and they say something on LinkedIn and it's not met with a standing ovation. That is uncomfortable because this audience is used to receiving a positive reception. But months 4 through 6, you start hearing, oh, I saw your post. Inbounds start to trickle in. The algorithm begins to recognize consistency. Months 6 through 12, it accelerates. Recruiting shifts. The narrative changes. The audience starts to build on itself. Years 2 and beyond, it's compounding. The flywheel is spinning. Every post lands harder. The audience was built before the moment you needed it. And that's the brutal truth, just to reiterate with visibility. You cannot build visibility when you need it. The exit case study proves the most powerfully. You cannot build an audience at the moment of exit. The audience needs to be built 24 months before that. So if you're 3 months in and thinking it's not working, you're right where everyone else was. The ones who won are the ones who kept going. So I will shift to Q&A here. Look at that, almost to the minute here. I want to land the plane though. CEO visibility isn't a marketing expense. It's a value creation lever. It sits along pricing, go-to-market, talent, and operations as something that compounds over time and drives measurable business outcomes. The 4 case studies today prove that: a $2 billion exit, 26% headcount growth during a talent crisis, a $6 billion IPO, top 3 retailers referencing LinkedIn posts and sales, meaning it's the same framework, 4 different industries, all repeatable. So here's what I'd encourage you to do today. Pick a leader in your organization, Google them, ask ChatGPT about them, check out their LinkedIn, and ask yourself if an acquirer, a candidate, or a reporter looked up this person, what would they find? If the answer is not much, that's the visibility gap, and now you know what to do about it. Thank you. I will turn things over to Q&A. I will kill the screen share here. What questions do you have that I can answer? And while I'm waiting for those questions, I will send the replay of this. I'll also send a survey. Would love your honest assessment of how valuable this was, other topics that you would like to hear about, and any other advice on how to improve this. This is the second webinar that we're doing, and we're doing more of them, and would love to collect whatever data or information would most help you, your portfolio companies, and people in your network. So I'll give one more second. If there's any questions, throw those in the chat in the Q&A panel. All right. Thank you all for joining. Oh, can you talk about strategies for scheduling posts? So, great question. I'll kind of go a little bit deep here, Greg, and let me know if I hit the mark for you. So before we talk about scheduling, I would talk about consistency. Now, I think, and my company thinks, the minimum to slice through the noise on LinkedIn is once a week. Excuse me. That to me is table stakes. From there, the more you post, the more exposure you get, but also the more data you get to refine that heat-seeking missile. Now, if someone's not working with us or not going to work with a vendor to do this, I would say, look, first and foremost, before we get about scheduling, let's talk about what's realistic. If it is realistic for you to write 6 posts a year, great. I want to do a post every other month rather than 6 posts all at once and then you drop off. That's the worst thing I see that happens. Some C-suite member gets fired up, they get on LinkedIn, they post, there's a flurry of activity for 2 weeks, and then crickets. I want to solve for consistency first. So the first question is the honest answer of like, what can you commit to in a 12-month span? Let's schedule back from that. Um, once that is done, let's say that you could commit to weekly. I kind of feel like with scheduling posts, Greg, the same way I feel about like exercising. Like you don't need Brian Johnson or Tim Ferriss's optimal workout. You just need to get to the gym. So like first and foremost, just post. If you got to pick arbitrarily, post Monday or Wednesday at 7 a.m. local time. Great. Don't over engineer this. Don't let that hold you back from start. Get starting. What we will do, and it's easier if you have someone posting more often, we can start to play around with the time of day and the day of the week, and we can change that up. It matters less than the consistency. But in general, I like it when people post at the start of their day. I like to put it in their time zone, assuming that that's the corpus of their network. If, for example, you had someone who was in New York, but their target audience is in California, great, post Pacific time instead. But I want it to go out fairly early so it can live over the course of the day. It seems like posts get, 12 to 18 hours of real spotlight, and then they are a little bit more ephemeral. So let me know if that answered your question. Next person, any recommendations on the minimum number of posts to make a month? I've been doing one a week, but that one example you had was 12 a month. Is there a jump at some threshold? AKA, should I aim for 6 to 8 or 10 to 12? So not knowing how many followers you have in general, if someone comes to me and they have under 5,000 followers, in my mind, I'm like once a week. Once a week is great. Once a week, I want you to be that metronome in, week out. I believe, especially as there's so much AI slop and so much noise out there, quality matters more. I would much rather you share one really good post a week than spreading yourself thin and trying to do more. The things that I look at in determining whether to ramp someone up, I look at obviously follower count, but then I look at engagement. I had one person, they had like 20,000 followers and they were posting and their posts were getting like 2 or 3 likes. So I'm like, okay, something is off here, right? we'd have to diagnose it more, but like at an outset, I want you posting less. And so I would want them to back off until their views and likes become more within a range of tolerance. We use a third-party platform for data analysis called Shield. It's shieldapp.ai, I think. Subscribe to their newsletter. It's great. We put out data from our 300 plus executives. They have 50,000 plus. It's a mix of influencer and executive. But what I really like about their newsletters is they're starting to break down and say, okay, if you have 1,000 to 5,000 followers, on average, you'll be getting about 700 views. And so if you look at the tables that they put out, you can look and see like, okay, am I above average, below average, or right on target? And when you do that, if you're right on average, keep doing what you're doing. If you start outperforming that and your posts are getting more views than what they say is the normal for your follower tier, I would suggest to ramp up, to do another post, two posts a week instead of one post, and then see like if you feel like you're saturating your audience, the views will go down. But if they're still in that range, I would continue. But that would be the guide for me, is looking at how you're performing relative to a larger data set. Um, Greg, sorry, I meant batching, creating posts 1 week or 1 month in the schedule when those go out. So, Greg, I think batching is the way to succeed here. I think that you have to do that. If you are an executive, you can't write every day or every week. And all of us, who have day jobs, we're going to have some fire drill that's going to get in the way of us being consistent. And so, I think that I view content in two buckets. And the first bucket is evergreen, and the second bucket is what we would call hot takes. The evergreen content you can batch the shit out of. Apologies for the profanity, but you can batch that as much as you'd like. And so, leadership stories. Like, I don't know you, Greg, but if I were to, I would ask you like, hey, who are three people, or who's someone who had a big impact on your career? It could be a college teacher, it could be an employer. Let's tell me that story. That's a great post. It's evergreen. It gives credibility. It shares what you've learned. It gives generosity. It kind of spotlights someone. There's a lot of elements that are going to cause that post to do well, but that post doesn't matter whether it goes out tomorrow or next month. And so I'm generally, for our clients, for myself, I'm generally staying about a month ahead. I don't want to get too far ahead. It just feels like some of it might get stale or be less relevant to what's going on in my life. So we're usually scheduled out about a month for our clients. Now, we will complement that with what we call hot takes. And what we see there is that if there is something going on that is related to your industry and related to your expertise, you have an arbitrage opportunity if you can be one of the voices in the first 72 hours to talk about it. So what we will do in that case is we'll say like, hey, this just happened. We think that you can speak to this, and we'll get them to weigh in, and we'll write the post. We'll try to get it out honestly within 24 hours, because then it's like news hijacking. There's an advantage to kind of answering that question more quickly. So that's the way I would think about this, Greg. You got the batching for the evergreen content, but if you get an idea that's timely, or if you're responding to something, then it can go out more quickly. And one last thought, personally, my tolerance is pretty low for the content, in terms of like, I did a sabbatical in Amsterdam, 2 years ago. And I put the post out like 2 months later. It didn't make a difference to me that it was, I think I probably positioned it because when it was written, it was like last week I was in Amsterdam. I didn't really care that it went out 2 months after the fact. I did have a few friends being like, I didn't know you were in Amsterdam last week. It was like, no, it was a month ago. I think that it doesn't really matter that much, but that's your own tolerance to figure out. Aaron, good to see you, buddy. I have a million LinkedIn invites from random people I don't know. Do you recommend accepting to increase your post reach, or do you just end up diluting the quality of your network? So I actually get this question a lot, and I I don't fault anyone on this. I think that some people have their shields up and they don't accept people. I personally feel like there's slightly more to gain than to lose on accepting invites. The filter for me is this person makes sense? Is it someone I want to get in front of? If so, yes, If it's clear that I'm going to accept it and I'm going to immediately get sold, no, I don't want the noise. So, sales and titles, no thanks. Very junior person, no thanks. My target audience, my ICP is CEOs, C-suite members, large companies, investors. 100%. If I see that, yes, I have no downside to accepting them. But I'll take this just a little bit further, Aaron. We will proactively do two things that I would recommend to all of you to fill your network with the right people. So for context here, the baseline is when you're publishing content, the Venn diagram is what can you speak to with authority and what does your target audience care about? And you want to live at the intersection of those two things. If you do that, you will organically attract people over time who care about what you're talking about. So if you just post content, this will happen naturally. But if you want to expedite it, there's two tools that I would recommend. The first is something that we call profile view outreach. So every day, someone looks at my account from my team, they look at who's viewed my profile, and they say, did anyone who's our ideal client persona look at Justin's profile? If so, I want to send a connection request. If I'm not connected to them, I absolutely want to make sure that I'm connected with them so they see my content again. What has likely happened is they're like, this is good content. Who's this guy? And then they may never see my content again. So I want to prevent that. So I will proactively reach out to that audience that I'm trying to cultivate. And the profile view is an incredibly strong signal. The second one is what we would call targeted outreach. So I know Aaron, I know we share a military background. What I will do, I will reach out to someone who has something in common with me and they're my target audience member. They were in the military and they're CEO. They live in Denver and they're a CEO. They went to Stanford and they're a CEO. So what I will do in that case is I will say, hey, Aaron, it looks like we're both CEOs. We both served in the military. I'd love to be connected with you. I promise I will never sell you anything. I just want to be connected because I'm playing the long game. I'm saying if this person is a connection, hopefully if I'm doing my job, I'm adding value, I'm saying things that help them, and maybe they see one post a month from me, even though I'm posting a lot. That's the long game I'm playing. But I will tell you, I have had people come back 6 months later. I don't know how we got connected, but I saw your content. I get what you do. I'd like to work with you. Great, completely different power dynamic. They're coming to me. They already know me. I've already built the trust. I'm not reaching out. Like I'm willing to wait 6 months for that to occur. So very long answer to your question, Aaron, but I would accept more people. And one last thing that I would add there, I have my shields up on my profile. To send me a connection request, you have to have my email, which is not a terribly hard thing to do, but it introduces an extra layer of friction that gets rid of automation, people reaching out to me in an automated way. But what that does is that if they can't do that, they'll follow me. Great. I'd rather have them be a follower than a connection, and that makes it slightly cleaner when I'm using my network to kind of feel like who I'm reaching out to. Great question. All right, we are almost, man, this has been the most precise webinar I've ever done. 2 minutes away. Any other questions before we wrap? I will be sending a survey. Would love your answer, honestly, about how we can improve. What else you'd like us to do these webinars on? I'll be doing one on healthcare, one on software, one on business services. I know those ones are in the works, but we can get as granular as you want. Thank you for joining. Thanks for the great questions, and I'll send the replay shortly. Take care.